Every major Western tech CEO is telling you the same story. China copies. China steals. China can't create anything original. And while they keep repeating this comfortable lie, China just deployed more AI systems in the last 18 months than the entire European Union has in the last decade. Here's the uncomfortable truth that's going to reshape your understanding of the next 20 years of technological power. The West is winning a competition that doesn't matter anymore, and China is dominating the competition that actually decides who controls the future. Let me show you what this actually means. When I talk to engineers in Silicon Valley, they genuinely believe they're ahead. They point to GPT-4, they point to their research papers, they point to their PhD programs, and they're not wrong about any of that. But here's what they completely miss: the game changed, and nobody sent them the memo. Most people think innovation means invention, creating something new in a lab, publishing a breakthrough paper, winning a Nobel Prize. But here's what's really happening. The innovation that matters in AI isn't who builds the best model. It's who deploys that model into 1 billion lives first. And by that metric, it's not even close. I'm going to break this down into 3 systems that explain exactly how China positioned itself to own the future of AI deployment. The first is their infrastructure paradox. The second is their regulation advantage. And the third is what I call the integration machine. By the time we're done, you'll understand why the China can't innovate narrative isn't just wrong. It's dangerously delusional. Let's start with the infrastructure paradox. And this one is going to challenge everything you think you know about technological progress. Here's a specific number that should stop you cold. China has deployed 847 million facial recognition cameras. That's not a rounded estimate. That's the documented count as of late 2023. The United States has approximately 85 million. That's a 10-to-1 ratio. But here's what nobody tells you. Those cameras aren't just surveillance devices. They're data collection infrastructure for AI training and deployment at a scale the West literally cannot replicate. When Western companies want to train a visual AI system, they scrape images from the internet, they license datasets, they spend years building synthetic training environments. When Chinese companies want to train the same system, they tap into a real-world data pipeline that captures more visual information in a single day than most Western datasets contain in total. I talked to a computer vision engineer who left a major Bay Area company to work in Shenzhen. Off the record, he told me something that stuck with me. He said the difference wasn't talent. Both places had brilliant people. The difference was data access. In California, he spent 60% of his time figuring out how to get training data. In Shenzhen, the data infrastructure already existed. He just built on top of it. That's the paradox. The same surveillance infrastructure that Western critics condemn as authoritarian overreach is simultaneously the foundation for the fastest AI deployment capability on Earth. And it doesn't stop at cameras. China has 1.2 million 5G base stations deployed. The United States has roughly 100,000. That's a 12-to-1 advantage in the infrastructure that enables edge AI, autonomous systems, and real-time machine learning applications. Here's what this actually means in practice. When an American company develops a new AI application, they then need to figure out deployment. They need connectivity. They need edge computing capacity. They need to negotiate with telecom providers and navigate legacy infrastructure built in the 1990s. When a Chinese company develops the same application, the deployment infrastructure already exists. The 5G network is there. The computing capacity at the edge is there. The integration points are standardized. This isn't about who invented the better algorithm. It's about who built the railroad tracks while everyone else was still arguing about which train engine was superior. And this is just the first layer. The second system is even more counterintuitive because it involves something Americans assume is their greatest advantage: regulation, or more precisely, the lack of it. What I'm about to show you flips the entire Chinese authoritarianism versus American freedom narrative completely upside down. So here's the second force at work, and this one operates completely differently from what you've been told. The standard Western narrative goes like this. America has light touch regulation. China has heavy-handed government control. Therefore, American companies can move fast and innovate, while Chinese companies are suffocated by bureaucracy. Sounds logical, right? There's just one problem. It's almost entirely backwards when it comes to AI deployment. Let me show you the numbers that matter. In 2023, China approved 197 generative AI products for public deployment. The approval process averaged 47 days from application to market. In the same period, no comprehensive AI regulatory framework even existed in the United States. Companies operated in legal gray zones, facing potential lawsuits from 17 different directions: copyright claims, privacy violations, discrimination allegations, employment law challenges. Here's the paradox that Western analysts completely miss. China's AI regulation is stricter on paper but faster in practice. America's AI regulation is looser on paper but paralyzing in reality. A senior economist told me off the record that American AI companies now spend more on legal compliance teams than on deployment engineering. Not because the laws require it, because the legal uncertainty requires it. Every major deployment decision goes through months of legal review, not because regulators demand it, but because companies fear what regulators might do later. China took the opposite approach. They created the interim measures for generative AI services in 2023. Strict rules, clear boundaries, defined approval process. And once you're approved, you deploy. No ambiguity, no lawsuit lottery, no waiting to see which state attorney general decides to make an example of you. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button, because what comes next changes the entire picture. Here's what matters about regulatory certainty. It's not about whether rules are strict or loose. It's about whether companies can calculate risk and move forward. When I was in Beijing last year, I met with a product manager at a mid-sized AI company. She told me something that crystallized this entire dynamic. She said in America, her competitors were afraid to ship, not because the technology wasn't ready, because the legal environment wasn't stable. Every deployment was a gamble on future regulation. Her company, they knew exactly what they could and couldn't do. The rules were demanding, but they were rules. Not guesses, not maybes, not, let's see what the FTC decides in 3 years. So while American companies built better models and then sat on them, her team deployed functional products to 200 million users. This is the regulation advantage, and it's accelerating. The European Union just passed the AI Act. It's 892 pages long. Compliance requirements span 6 different risk categories. Implementation timelines stretch to 2027. Companies are already hiring armies of consultants just to understand what they're supposed to do. Meanwhile, China updated their framework in 11 pages. Clear categories, defined processes, 60-day implementation window. Which environment do you think moves faster? But here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in Washington wants to admit. America's regulatory chaos isn't an accident. It's a feature of the system. Multiple competing agencies, state versus federal jurisdiction, adversarial legal culture. These aren't bugs that will get fixed. They're structural realities that take decades to change. China doesn't have that problem. When Beijing decides AI deployment is a national priority, every level of government aligns within months. The approval pipelines open, the infrastructure investments flow, the deployment barriers disappear. Now let me pull the first 2 systems together before we move to the third. The infrastructure paradox means China has the physical foundation for AI deployment that simply doesn't exist elsewhere. The regulation advantage means they have the legal pathway to move from development to deployment faster than any Western competitor. But neither of those would matter without the third system, and this is the one that makes everything else work. I call it the integration machine. This is where China's approach becomes genuinely difficult for Western observers to understand, because it requires accepting that their definition of innovation might be fundamentally wrong. Stay with me, because what comes next challenges the deepest assumptions about how technological power actually works. So let's talk about the integration machine. And to understand this, you need to abandon everything you learned about innovation in business school. The Western model of innovation looks like this. Brilliant individual has breakthrough idea. Startup forms around that idea. Venture capital funds the startup. Company scales independently. Maybe gets acquired. Maybe goes public. Success is measured by the uniqueness of the original invention. The Chinese model looks completely different, and it's optimized for something Western observers consistently undervalue: implementation at scale. Here's a specific example that illustrates exactly what I mean. In 2022, a Chinese company called iFlyTech deployed an AI-powered education system across 38,000 schools, serving 50 million students. Not a pilot program, not a limited trial. Full deployment in 14 months. Let me show you why that number matters. The Los Angeles Unified School District, America's second largest, spent 4 years trying to deploy a tablet-based learning system to 640,000 students. The project collapsed. Cost overruns, integration failures, teacher resistance, vendor disputes. China deployed a more sophisticated AI system to 78 times more students in 1/4 of the time. That's the integration machine at work. Here's what nobody tells you about how this actually functions. It's not about top-down government orders. That's the lazy Western analysis. It's about ecosystem alignment that makes deployment frictionless. When iFlyTech deploys to schools, the hardware manufacturers already know the specifications. The telecom companies have already provisioned the bandwidth. The teacher training programs have already been developed through government partnerships. The payment systems are already integrated through municipal platforms. Every piece connects because the entire ecosystem is designed for rapid integration. I talked to factory workers in Shenzhen who manufacture the terminals for these education systems. They told me something fascinating. The production orders come with deployment timelines built in. They're not just manufacturing hardware. They're manufacturing to a national implementation schedule. Compare that to America, where every deployment requires negotiating with dozens of independent stakeholders who have no obligation to cooperate. Now here's the uncomfortable truth that challenges Western assumptions about superiority. Silicon Valley still produces more breakthrough AI research papers than any place on Earth. That's objectively true. American researchers dominate the academic conferences. They win the awards. They publish the citations. But research papers don't serve customers. Deployed systems do. And by the metric of deployed systems serving real users, China is pulling ahead so fast that the gap may already be irreversible. Let me give you the numbers that matter. Chinese AI companies filed 29,853 AI-related patents in 2023. American companies filed 14,234. That's more than a 2-to-1 ratio. But here's what's really significant. Analysis of those patents shows that 61% of Chinese filings were implementation-focused. Integration innovations, deployment optimizations, scale engineering. American patents skewed heavily toward algorithmic breakthroughs, important work. But work that means nothing until someone figures out how to put it in front of users. This is the innovation lie at its core. The West defined innovation as invention. China defined innovation as implementation. And while Americans congratulated themselves for winning the invention game, China built the infrastructure to win the implementation game. Here's what makes people uncomfortable. Implementation innovation isn't glamorous. Nobody writes magazine profiles about the engineer who figured out how to reduce deployment latency by 40 milliseconds. Nobody gives TED Talks about the team that integrated 17 legacy systems into a unified AI platform. But those are the innovations that determine who controls the technology. When I was in Beijing last year, a venture capitalist told me something that stuck with me. He said, American investors want to fund the next breakthrough. Chinese investors want to fund the next deployment. Same industry, completely different theory of value creation. And the deployment investors are winning. Because here's the thing about breakthroughs. They're only valuable if you can implement them. And implementation requires infrastructure, regulatory clarity, and ecosystem integration. China has all three. America has one, arguably. And it's the one that matters least. So, let me pull this together and show you why this matters for the next 20 years of technological competition. Because the implications go far beyond AI. They reshape our entire understanding of how power transfers between civilizations. Let me pull this together because what we've covered reveals something much bigger than AI competition. We've examined 3 systems. The infrastructure paradox, where China built the physical foundation for AI deployment, while the West debated privacy concerns. The regulation advantage, where Chinese clarity beats American chaos despite conventional assumptions. And the integration machine, where ecosystem alignment enables implementation at speeds Western companies cannot match. Together, these 3 systems form what I call the deployment dominance framework. And understanding this framework changes how you should think about technological power for the rest of your life. Here's what this actually means for the future. The China can't innovate lie isn't just wrong. It's a strategic blindfold that prevents Western leaders from seeing what's actually happening. Every time a pundit repeats this narrative, they reinforce complacency. Every time a politician claims American technological superiority is guaranteed, they delay the necessary response. And the clock is ticking, because deployment advantages compound. Every AI system China deploys generates more data. More data enables better models. Better models enable more deployment. It's a flywheel that accelerates with each rotation. America is still building better engines, but China is building the entire railroad network. And once that network exists, it doesn't matter whose engine is theoretically superior. What matters is whose trains are running. Let me give you 3 scenarios for how this plays out over the next decade. Scenario 1. The wake-up call. Western leaders recognize the deployment gap and launch a coordinated response. Regulatory frameworks get streamlined. Infrastructure investment accelerates. Ecosystem integration becomes a priority. This requires admitting the current approach is failing. The probability? Based on current political dynamics, I'd estimate 15%, maybe less. Scenario 2. The slow decline. The West continues winning metrics that don't matter while losing the metrics that do. Research paper counts stay high. Deployed user counts fall further behind. By 2030, Chinese AI systems serve 3 billion daily users, while American systems serve 800 million. The technological balance of power shifts permanently, but slowly enough that each individual year seems manageable. This is the most likely scenario. I'd put it at 60% probability. Scenario 3. The sudden reckoning. A specific trigger event forces recognition of the gap. Maybe it's a military application where deployment speed proves decisive. Maybe it's an economic crisis where AI-enabled efficiency determines which economies survive. Maybe it's a pandemic response where integrated AI systems outperform fragmented Western approaches. The trigger is unpredictable, but the underlying reality is already set. 25% probability within this decade. None of these scenarios require China to out-invent America. They only require China to out-deploy America. And that's already happening. Here's the final piece that should reshape your thinking. The deployment dominance framework doesn't just apply to AI. It applies to every emerging technology: quantum computing, biotechnology, clean energy, advanced manufacturing. In each domain, the same pattern holds. Western institutions optimize for breakthrough invention. Chinese institutions optimize for scaled implementation. The nation that deploys wins. The nation that invents but cannot deploy becomes an intellectual colony, generating ideas that others monetize. This is what the China can't innovate lie conceals. Not Chinese weakness, but Western vulnerability. Not Chinese copying, but Chinese prioritization. Not Chinese theft, but Chinese strategy. So what should you do with this information? If you're an investor, start evaluating companies on deployment capability, not just research breakthroughs. If you're a policymaker, understand that regulatory clarity matters more than regulatory absence. If you're an engineer, recognize that implementation innovation deserves as much respect as algorithmic innovation. And if you're just someone trying to understand where the world is heading, remember this framework: infrastructure, regulation, integration. Whoever masters all 3 controls the future. The China can't innovate lie has been comfortable, it's been reassuring, and it's been catastrophically wrong. Now you know what's actually happening. The question is what you'll do with that knowledge. Drop a comment below, telling me which of the 3 systems surprised you most. Was it the infrastructure paradox, the regulation advantage, or the integration machine? I read every comment, and your answers shape future videos. If this changed how you think about technological competition, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because what we covered today is just the beginning of a much larger story. I'll see you in the next one.